Welcome to a series where we talk about the World Cup histories of each nation at the 2026 World Cup. Today we'll be talking about my country, these assholes. The United States plays a very strange role in international soccer. We're underdogs, but we're not lovable. We're misfits. We're what happens when one of the superpowers of the world doesn't take soccer that seriously. But the sport still does have a little bit of a cult following here that has grown into a full-on fandom in recent years, and our national side reflects that journey. US soccer has grown from a joke to an also-ran to something a bit more hit and miss in recent years. Let's go through our glorious footballing history. The history of US soccer goes all the way back to the very first World Cup, Uruguay 1930, which the United States would attend. Drawn with Belgium and Paraguay as the seeded team in the group, the US would beat Belgium in a game that kicked off simultaneously as one of the two first World Cup games ever played, with the US winning 3-0 and matching that scoreline in our second game against Paraguay to advance to the World Cup semifinals. Enjoy it, fellow Americans, this is already our peak. In the semifinals, the US would be matched up with Argentina, one of the favorites to win the World Cup along with the hosts. And this is where that American can-do spirit hit a brick wall. In the cavernous dimensions of the Estadio Centenario, the US was bullied by an Argentina team that was as skillful as they were brutal. An Argentine player broke Ralph Tracy's leg, and in an era before substitutes, this bastard played on with a broken leg from the 10th minute until fucking halftime, where a US team down 1-0 would now go down a man, breaking the dam and ending the game 6-1 in favor of lovable Celeste. The US would finish Uruguay 1930 in third place, asterisk. This was the only ever World Cup with no third place game, thanks to Yugoslavia having some issues with the way their semifinal against Uruguay went down. FIFA retroactively gave the US the bronze medal for this World Cup. How legitimate that is of course up to you, but I'm claiming this. Y'all are saying the US has no soccer history whatsoever? What the hell is this, third place? Fuck you, haters. Italy 1934 was the first World Cup to have qualifiers, and the US decided, fuck it, we don't care. We're not even gonna attempt. And then at the last minute, they decided, wait, actually, can we? And FIFA said, okay, sure, y'all can play Mexico in a playoff in Rome days before the start of the World Cup. Why not? The US would win this game 4-2 after 4 goals from Aldo Dinelli, meaning poor Mexico sailed all the way out to Italy for nothing, and the US would move on to the actual tournament. In a single elimination tournament, the US would open with the hosts Italy, and this was never going to happen for a team that was already being left behind by the elites of the sport. Italy put 7 on the US and eliminated them on their way to winning a World Cup shrouded in controversy. For France in 1938, the US was originally going to play against the Dutch East Indies in the playoffs to reach the World Cup finals, but the US would withdraw without playing that, making this the first World Cup of many to not feature the premier talent of the American soccer team. This is where World War II happens, wipes out the next 2 World Cups, and soccer becomes more and more de-emphasized here in the States. It's okay though, we won the World Tournament that really mattered, and we took out the Nazis forever. Brazil 1950 would include the United States after they and Mexico got North America's top 2 spots ahead of Cuba. Not the worst thing the US will do to Cuba this decade. Here, the World Cup once again has a group stage, just as God intended, and the US was drawn in one with Spain, Chile, and England. The States team was made up of a bunch of amateur players in an era of rising professionalism in the sport, and had a bunch of dudes specifically from St. Louis, Missouri, going against professional England and Spain teams. We're fucked. In our first game against Spain, a rematch of the Spanish-American War, Spain would once again sink the main in a 3-1 win in Curitiba, although the US did hold a 1-0 lead for most of the game before collapsing late. Shouts out to America for this performance. They did better than expected, but we've seen this one before. Overmatched team makes a good impression and competes in a game no one expects them to, then they eat shit for the rest of the tournament. I already talked about Haiti the other day. Except famously, that is not how this story goes. Nope. The US plays England, this time in a rematch of the Revolutionary War, and what follows may be the greatest upset in the history of the sport. Playing in their first ever World Cup, England was expecting to waltz to the title game at the very least, but they would be unable to create even a single goal, and thanks to a 38th minute goal from Joe Gaetjens, the US would stun the world and finish with a 1-0 win. England newspapers at home figured the typewriters must have made a mistake, but no, this game really went the States' way. The US would lose their final game to Chile 5-2 and finish tied at the bottom of our group, 4th place on goal difference, but who gives a shit? We beat England. Suck our Yankee dicks, bitch. For Switzerland 1954, there was only one spot for a North American team, and after losing both games to Mexico, that North American team would not be the US. For Sweden 1958, North America's one spot would be contested by 9 teams, and the US would begin in a group with their neighbors, Mexico and Canada. If you wanted to know just how far US soccer had already fallen so early on in our history here, the States would lose all 4 of these games, scoring 5 goals and conceding 21. For Chile 1962, Canada withdrew, meaning the US was competing directly with Mexico for advancement in North America, and a draw in LA was followed by a loss at CDMX, and another World Cup goes by without our involvement. Although the US would remedy that a little bit later with another kind of involvement in Chile. It's now England 1966, and in order for us to play in the country that colonized us, we have to first advance out of a group that contains Mexico and Honduras. We got decent results here, including a draw with Mexico, but El Tri was just too strong, and the US is once again just stranded, on the same levels as the Chinas and Indias of the world. The Champions League exists now. Real money is being pumped into this sport, and we're just not a part of this landscape. We're creating this Super Bowl. We're growing basketball, expanding past the original 6 in hockey and the original 16 in the MLB. Fuck soccer, that sport is for pussies. Mexico 1970 is next door, and thus Mexico's automatically qualified and won't be bothering us. We now have to top a group that includes Canada and Bermuda, and oh my goodness, we actually did it. Canada tripped and fell on Bermuda away, and that was enough for us to squeak into a 4-team playoff where we'd have to play Haiti home and away. Here the Stars and Stripes would lose both games and be eliminated in our best effort in a while, but we couldn't take advantage of Mexico's auto-qualification as the drought now reaches 2 decades. We're now in the era of the CONCACAF Championship moonlighting as qualification, and the US would finish 3rd of 3 in a group with Mexico and Canada to fail to even reach the 6-team CONCACAF Championship field. No US at West Germany 1974. The 1977 CONCACAF Championship would once again not even feature the United States after finishing level with Mexico and Canada in their 3-team group, finishing behind Mexico in goal difference and losing a playoff with Canada and Haiti. Oof. The 1981 CONCACAF Championship would, guess what, not feature the United States after they barely finished in last in the North American zone, even despite beating Mexico in their final group game. The 1985 CONCACAF Championship would miraculously contain the United States after the US was able to win a 2-legged playoff with the Netherlands at Tilly's. The game was changed by the championship expanding to 9, meaning we were doing 2 group stages to get a winner. The other change was Mexico hosting the 1986 World Cup after taking hosting duties from Colombia, meaning only 1 more spot was available out of North America. This was going to be a bloodbath, but the US had a good chance to do it in a group with Costa Rica and Trinidad and Tobago, winning home and away against the Soca Warriors and drawing in Costa Rica to gain the advantage going into the home leg. Held in LA, with the home field advantage being non-existent at best, the US would lose 1-0 to Costa Rica, falling to Los Ticos by 1 point and falling just short of qualification again. The States' history at the World Cup has been spotty at best up to this point, being underdogs at a few early World Cups, and then being completely irrelevant even in a weaker region of the world, being thoroughly outclassed by rivals and neighbors Mexico, and even falling behind countries like El Salvador, Honduras, Costa Rica, Canada, Haiti, Trinidad and Tobago. Things are bad. We're now at a point where football has become the biggest sport in the country, while baseball is having a golden age here in the 80s as well. Basketball is becoming a bigger sport at the height of the Magic Bird rivalry, while other sports like hockey and golf and tennis become more popular here in America. Professional leagues have risen and fallen. Not even the presence of Pele could cause soccer to grow here. It's under these circumstances that FIFA awards the hosting rights to the 1994 World Cup to little old USA, going with the existing infrastructure and potential for growth in the US as opposed to Brazil and Morocco having more, passion. This was of course a controversial choice, as FIFA always makes, as one of the requirements to hosting a World Cup was to have at least some kind of professional domestic league. The US would pledge to do just that as part of the compromise to host the event, creating the MLS, which would eventually begin play in 1996. With that said, the US will make a World Cup in 1994 at the very least. Qualifying for Italia 90 was the tune-up to that experience, and this was a roller coaster. To qualify for the 1989 CONCACAF Championship, the US just needed to win a playoff with Jamaica, doing so via a 0-0 draw in Kingston and a 5-1 demolishing in St. Louis. The CONCACAF Championship was now 5 teams. I don't know why they went back and forth so much, but with 2 spots for automatic qualification, and more importantly, Mexico being banned from the 1990 World Cup, it was looking possible for the US to be competitive here. In a double round robin, the US would pull some good results, but also dropped plenty of points, most notably drawing at home with El Salvador. This put the US in a position where they needed to beat Trinidad and Tobago on the road in order to qualify for the World Cup. With both teams desperate for a taste of World Cup action, the atmosphere at this game was unreal. Trini fans had to think their team was the favorite with the home field advantage and everything, but in the 30th minute, Paul Caligiuri silenced the crowd.
Putting it in to Caligiuri. Beats the first man. A left-footed shot!
This is one of my favorite goals ever scored by a US soccer player, and it's referred to here as the shot heard around the world. An extremely American thing to call this goal. The US would hold this 1-0 lead thanks in part to the goal-keeping heroics of Tony Meola, and they would reach the World Cup for the first time in over 40 years. The dark days of the USMNT are over. Now imagine being off the international radar for the entire growth of soccer as a sport, and the first tournament you make it back for is freaking Italia 90. No wonder the sport hasn't grown here enough. Our draw sucked too, ending up with 3 European teams, including the hosts. As outsiders in our group, their first game against Czechoslovakia went as expected. The Czechs and Slovaks had 2 goals by halftime, ended up with 5. This is embarrassing. But Caligiuri would give the Yanks a consolation goal for their first goal since Joe Maca hit a penalty against Chile all the way back in 1950. For context, that dude had been dead for nearly a decade by the time this goal was scored. After being blown to smithereens by a country on its way out of existence, we now had to play the hosts for basically our World Cup lives. Italy would score even earlier than Czechoslovakia did, with Giuseppe Giannini embarrassing poor Wendy and giving the Azzurri the lead. They should have made it 2-0 too, but Gianluca Vialli hit the post on a penalty he earned to keep us in the game. Italy played with their food long enough to the point that we started getting chances to equalize, and if Walter Zenga had been less amazing in goal, we really might have gotten something out of this game. Still though, it was a 1-0 loss, essentially eliminating the US from the World Cup. America's final game was against Austria, and despite having a man advantage for most of the game, we would lose game number 3 of 3 on our way to bottom of the group. This was a rough start to say the least, but it was valuable experience out of USA 94 for a national team that badly needed it. A few guys even made stars of themselves here, including Paul Caligiuri, Tony Meola, and John Harkes. It's time for the world's biggest event to come to quaint old USA, where we have indoor stadiums, giant coasts on the Atlantic and Pacific, and basically didn't need to do any kind of construction or infrastructure improvements in order to host the event. Who needs to kill thousands of migrant workers when you already have the Rose Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, RFK Stadium, Soldier Field, the Meadowlands, some iconic venues in American football? The US would be drawn into Group A, and their draw ended up being super interesting. We got both Romania and Switzerland out of Europe, as well as Colombia out of South America, and this is a bit of a double-edged sword as far as draws go. The obvious thing to celebrate is no Italy, no Brazil, no Germany, let's fucking go. But this group was not easy at all. The US was still looking at shaky odds to even make the knockouts. Colombia was seen as dark horses to win the entire tournament, with Pele famously predicting them to lift the trophy here. Romania also had a golden generation led by the great Gorgi Hagi, and while Switzerland didn't have the star power of the other two, they were also a really solid team with a few good players as well. America's first game would take place against those Swiss, and taking place in the Pontiac Silverdome, this would be the first World Cup ever played indoors. That mattered too because the Silverdome didn't have air conditioning, and this game was being played in June. All this resulted in a super stuffy match that both teams were just completely dead by the end of the game. The Swiss would open the scoring with a nice free kick by George Bregy, but he soon got one-upped by Eric Wynalda, who hit a zonker of a free kick to equalize for the States at halftime. The second half was a tough watch, but the States would hold on for the 1-1 draw. On the one hand, this result made a win in one of their other games almost certainly enough to qualify. The problem is the Swiss were seen as the easiest team in the group. They now had to beat either Colombia or Romania. Game 2, the United States versus Colombia. One of the most infamous soccer matches to ever be played. The beginning of the game is chaotic with multiple chances for both teams, but in the 35th minute, the most famous own goal in the history of soccer happened. John Harkes looped in across for Ernie Stewart in the box, but it never reached him. Colombian center back Andres Escobar would meet the ball to clear it, and he miskicked it as badly as possible, putting it directly in his own net and past Oscar Cordoba to give the US the lead. Ernie Stewart would get behind the Colombian defense just after halftime to double our lead with a really nice goal I didn't know the Americans were capable of in '94. I can't even imagine the pressure Colombia was playing under during this World Cup and specifically this game, because they were anonymous from here, only threatening late with a goal from Adolfo Valencia that ended up being for consolation, because it was the States that would hold on to this huge result, and Andres Escobar would be murdered for it before the end of the World Cup. Up next was Romania, and a point would be enough to send the United States through in at least second, but Romania was fucking sick in the 90s. Everyone who knows anything about Romanian soccer knows about Gheorghe Hagi, their great attacking mid, but he wasn't amazing in this game, and yet Romania was still able to win anyway. It was actually Florin Radicaiu who was cooking us in this game, as he set up the only goal of the game and looked like the danger man until he was subbed off late. The US had plenty of opportunities, but in this game they were unable to knock down the door. This result saw the US drop to third, but they were still able to get through to the knockouts as one of the best third place teams, so holy shit, we did it. We're on to the knockouts for the first time since literally 1930. We have not embarrassed the country. Let's fucking go. Brazil would be our opponents in the round of 16, and you couldn't have a more David versus Goliath matchup if you tried. Brazil had some of the best players in the world, with greats playing in the Brazilian League and in Europe, whereas the US team had 7 players playing abroad, 14 players contracted directly to the US Soccer Federation, and a dude playing for the team called the Los Angeles Salsa. One team had 3 World Cups and is on their way to a 4th. The other one has 2 World Cup appearances since Elvis went mainstream. One team had Romario, one team had Alexi Lalas. The contrast is stark. Of course, the actual game ended up being much more competitive than most would have expected. In fact, it was actually the Americans who started off looking like the more vibrant side. Brazil grew into the game as the first half went on though, and towards the end of the first half, a Brazil goal started looking inevitable. But this is when their left back Leonardo would get himself sent off after elbowing Bramos in the face. The man advantage is always a big deal in soccer, but on the flip side, Tab would have to sub off at halftime because his fucking skull was fractured. Tab had been the engine of the US attack this game, and on the other side of halftime, it was Brazil looking like they were the ones with the man advantage instead. An honestly amazing play from that prick Alexi Lalas would keep the score 0-0 deeper than anyone would have expected, but Bebeto would finally open the scoring in the 73rd minute with an extremely anticlimactic goal. The US wouldn't mount a serious attack from here, and the late Fernando Clavio would get himself sent off to piss away the man advantage on top of that. The boys had fought well, but Brazil were the winners, and they would go on to hoist the trophy. A few things about this tournament before we move on, because there is a lot to talk about here. First off, the US kits were very out there and very 90s. The home blue kit is iconic as hell. It's probably one of the most bizarre soccer shirt designs I've ever seen pulled off well, and it might be the best kit the usmnt has ever worn. On the other hand, the change red kits look like a Southampton player was free bleeding, and that's on the other end of the kit spectrum for me. Just very out there designs for a very out there experience. Hosting the tournament ended up being a big success, and while a lot of the Americans that tuned into the event would not stick around as hardcore club soccer fans or anything, I do think this World Cup legitimized the sport to some degree here in the States. It's a long climb to the top of the US sports hierarchy, and it's a climb the sport is still on, more than 3 decades later from this. But people did care about soccer after this World Cup, and that's a win, I'll take that. Going forward, the MLS would begin play in 1996, before the next qualifying cycle, and even if it hasn't reached the popularity of the Big Four yet, it's hard not to qualify the MLS as a success. It's not won me over yet, although Charlotte FC is bringing it home next year, but that is going to help add legitimacy to the sport here in the US as well as to US soccer's reputation worldwide. Qualifying for France in '98 started with a group containing Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Trinidad and Tobago, and this was light work for the States, who started with a sweep of Trinidad and Tobago en route to a 9 points of 9 start, and they would coast to first place in the group to advance to the Hex. Here, they and Costa Rica joined Mexico, Canada, Jamaica, and El Salvador, a classic Hex group. In the Hex, the US had a pretty bad start, having only 1 win through half of the double round robin, and sitting in 3rd place, riding the fence between qualification and failure. None of these results are absolute disasters in and of themselves. CONCACAF qualifying is tough, but 6 points from 5 games is a bad pace. They would pick up that pace a little bit in the second half of the campaign, still somehow drawing Jamaica at home, but getting a 0-0 at the Azteca and winning their other 3 games. This got them qualified with a game to spare, which is nice, but it's hard to call this campaign super encouraging. Things got even worse with this draw though. Germany out of pot 1 is tough. The former Yugoslav Republic is even tougher because this was one of the best teams outside of pot 1 and a genuine dark horse to make a big run. That one is even more complicated too because FR Yugoslavia is just Serbia and Montenegro carrying on the name in the immediate years following the breakup of the bigger Yugoslavia. That means we're playing against a team we were basically at war with at this point. And then the third team, fucking Iran, a country we have had extremely tense relations with since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and this wasn't a bad team either. So on the soccer field, it's a tough draw, and in geopolitical terms, it's an absolute nightmare draw. On top of that, the run-up to the World Cup was just abysmal. Gone was legendary coach Bora Milutinovic, who had taken the US to glory in '94, and in was Steve Sampson, a guy who did not have the credentials to be here. He was an assistant to Bora and coaching the usmnt, and he became the interim after Bora left. He had a great run at the 1995 Copa America and beat Argentina somehow. I don't really understand. But he was kept on for the World Cup cycle. We see this kind of thing happen a lot in college sports here in America. We literally just saw it happen with Ole Miss football and a bunch of college basketball teams who it didn't work out for any of them. Steve Sampson was quite literally a college coach who got plonked into this situation. He was the real-life Ted Lasso, basically. This led to some very interesting choices being made, like the team staying in the middle of nowhere in France, or the team preparing to play a 3-6-1 formation, which sounds as insane as it is. Of course, there's also the part where the final roster is announced and their captain, John Harkes, is just not there. This became one of the biggest mysteries in US soccer history for a while, until it was revealed that Harkesy was dropped for having an affair on his wife with Eric Wijnaldum's wife. This is some Bravo TV fucking Scandival type shit. After all the chaos, America's World Cup opened with the daunting task of the Germans. We immediately conceded. Jurgen Klinsmann nodded a header towards goal, and Andreas Muller finished it off to put us in a hole we were never going to be able to get out of using this whack-ass 3-6-1. Klinsmann would do it to us on the other side of halftime himself, making it 2-0 and ending the game then and there. The US was toothless and worse than the 2-0 score would indicate, and despite this being a game we knew we were likely to lose, it's hard to be optimistic after watching that happen to our team. The second game was the big one, the US versus Iran. I cannot imagine what the lead up to this game must have been like being there, but the game itself was madness. The US created a ton of chances with a new, more realistic 3-5-2, but the lineup Sampson used was just odd. No Marcelo Balboa, no Eric Wijnaldum, even that prick Alexi Lala should have been on the pitch. None of them were able to do anything other than hit the post and crossbar over and over again, and before halftime it would actually be Iran who opened the scoring against the run of play. The Americans were increasingly frustrated with their inability to convert a single one of their many chances, and Iran would end the game with a lethal counterattack sprung by the great Ali Daei and put away by the pacey Mehdi Matavikia. Brian McBride got us a goal before the final whistle, but that was it. The final score was 2-1 Iran. We're out. Our final group game against FR Yugoslavia was a dead rubber, a consolation game. It's the Poland game of honor. In this game, the US would give up a sloppy goal immediately and then lose the game 1-0. One of the most dire World Cup games I've ever seen. This World Cup was an absolute embarrassment for the USMNT and undid a lot of the forward progress made by the sport here in the States from USA 94. This outcome, combined with the women's team winning the 1999 World Cup, contributed to the general vibe around soccer when I was a kid, specifically that it was a sport for girls. I don't think this is really a thing anymore, but I remember when I was a kid, that's how it was. I played soccer as a little kid, but if you were 12 and trying to play soccer legitimately, you were probably going to get bullied for it. Moving on to Korea-Japan 2002, qualifying was kind of a fucking mess. The US was starting a group with Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Barbados, and they had a surprisingly tough time with this group. They drew their opener after conceding late in Guatemala. They lost at the Saprissa to Costa Rica to sit 4th of 4 through 2 games. That's horrible. But the US would recover from here thanks to 2 wins over Barbados and a clutch win in DC against Guatemala. The US and Costa Rica would advance to the Hex, meeting Mexico, Jamaica, Honduras, and Trinidad and Tobago. In the Hex, the US would flip things and go on a tear, winning 4 and drawing 1 to sit on the top of the table after 5 games, somehow 9 whole points clear of Mexico. At this exact point, the Americans and Mexicans flipped form, with the US losing at the Azteca, then getting upset by Honduras at RFK Stadium, and then losing at the Saprissa again to Costa Rica. Mexico is now level with the US, and we were now out of a World Cup spot on goal difference with 2 matches to spare. The US would beat Jamaica in the 9th game thanks to a clutch brace from Joe Max Moore of all people, and even though we drew with Trinidad and Tobago in the last game, the Trinis did us a big favor and upset Honduras in their penultimate game, allowing us to finish 3rd ahead of them and squeak into the World Cup. The group draw saw us put with one of the co-hosts, South Korea, alongside Portugal and Poland. Portugal had an awesome team with guys like Luis Figo and Rui Costa. Poland was solid as well, and South Korea not only had home field advantage, but themselves a decent team with a young Park Ji-sung. We knew this group was gettable, but it also looked like the US was the weakest team out of the 4. This really could have gone a number of ways. With optimism among fans pretty low, the US would open their World Cup in Portugal and shock the world. The game started immediately with a scruffy goal from the US, where John O'Brien was there for the rebound goal to put the US up 1-0. From here, Portugal wasn't even able to take control of the game like you'd expect an elite European team to do against a ragtag team of MLS players and third-tier European League players. That's what the US is. The States would get more opportunities from here, and they scored again before the 30th minute when Landon Donovan tried to cross into the box, and his cross took a massive, unreal deflection off of defender Jorge Costa and snuck in at the near post for a very, very strange own goal and an even stranger 2-0 lead for the States. The US went from doing the Luigi wins by doing absolutely nothing and turned into soccer heroes when they scored a 3rd goal before halftime, and this one was something special. Fullback Tony Sane delivered a picture-perfect cross to Brian McBride, whose header was on point to beat Vitor Baia and send the Yanks into dreamland. Portugal would bring it back to 3-1 pretty soon after McBride's goal, with a rebound goal from Beto on a corner. Not a classy goal at all, but Portugal will take what they can get. They ended up getting a 2nd goal back in the second half on a pretty horrible own goal from big dumb Jeff Agus. Like, this is the kind of own goal that some Colombians were accusing Andres Escobar of scoring, but Agus is so much worse. Still though, this is the point where you'd expect Portugal to shift into gear and start attacking Brad Friedel's goal like the Germans attacked the Ardennes in World War I. But nothing happened for the last 20 minutes, and the US was able to hold on for their 2nd huge upset of a European power in World Cup history. In the simplest terms, this upset of Portugal meant this World Cup had already been a success for the US, if we're being real. But looking at the full view of the group, we now had a real chance to advance here. South Korea and Poland are objectively less talented teams than the one we just beat, and 3 points is an incredible springboard to work with. Unfortunately, next up were the South Koreans, and if the Portuguese were a talented team playing below their standards, then the South Korea team was a team full of cult heroes and nobodies being propelled forward by their home crowd. The Koreans started out bright, but one of their early attacks saw one of their forwards, Hwang Sung-hong, have to leave the game for a few minutes after a collision with Frankie Hajduk. During this time, the US would convert a chance thanks to O'Brien finding Clint Mathis on a nice through ball, and Mathis converting for a lead we did not deserve. The universe would strike back though when Jeff Agus strikes again, conceding a big dumb penalty. But when Lee Yul-yong stepped up to take it, he was denied by Friedel in goal, who made a great save and saw the rebound sent wide to clear the danger. The US managed to bring their 1-0 lead to halftime. The second half continued to be back and forth, with the game falling into a nice pattern of Korea trying to equalize, the US hitting back and trying to seal the victory, but eventually the Koreans would win out. Lee Yul-yong made up for the pen miss by putting a good ball into the box that was headed home by substitute Ong Jung-won to level the score. On would celebrate with a figure skating charade, which was a reference to one of multiple figure skating related controversies at the 2002 Winter Olympics, where Apollo Ono won gold following the disqualification of a South Korean skater. This is one of the funniest reasons for there to be beef between two nations. It really makes me nostalgic for the better days. The US would hold out for the draw here, with Brad Friedel 100% being the man of the match, and now the US had 4 points after 2 days. That was absolutely insane. The Americans' final game was against Poland, who was playing the Poland special. They were already eliminated from the World Cup. But you know how America does against these former Iron Curtain countries in the World Cup. We came into this game probably needing a point to feel safe, unless Portugal just blew it against South Korea. Knowing this, we started by immediately giving up 2 goals. Emmanuel Elisadibe and Jacek Krnawek got goals in the first 5 minutes, with a disallowed goal from Landon Donovan sandwiched in between. Poland had multiple chances to score a third, and they eventually did in the 66th minute. And now down 3-0, the US were at their absolute nadir, for a couple of minutes, and then this happens. That is the sound of South Korea taking a 1-0 lead against Portugal at Incheon Stadium, a result that, if held, would mean that both South Korea and the United States would go through. The rest of this game was now secondary to the goings-on out at Incheon, but while Donovan would score to bring it to 3-1, that's where the result would stay. This ended up being one of the rare World Cup games where both teams leave the pitch happy, with the US going through and the Poles going home as winners. A little bit. The Americans went through in second place, which is not amazing, but in an upside-down World Cup, what being termed the World Cup of the underdogs, where the US's insane run to the knockouts is like the 5th or 6th biggest underdog run already, this is not that much of a disadvantage as it is in other more normal World Cups. The round of 16, the US would be met up with Mexico, their CONCACAF rivals, and this is amazing. It's a totally winnable knockout game against their biggest rivals. What more could you ask for? To open this game, Mexico looked like the better team early, but the US grabbed a goal against the run of play early via Brian McBride. Mexico was kind of shell-shocked after this and failed to get an equalizer until Landon Donovan made it 2-0 to the US. This fully killed Mexico's spirit, and the Americans would close out a famous 2-0 result to advance to the quarterfinals for the first time in a modern World Cup. If the 1994 run proved American soccer could succeed, the 2002 run posited that American soccer was going to keep improving. Unfortunately, the US would run into a rematch with Germany in the quarters, and in any normal World Cup, this is a death sentence. Luckily, this is the 2002 World Cup, and this German team is weaker than normal. It's honestly the US who played better in this game. Claudio Reyna looked like the best player on the pitch, but it was the Germans who got the goal just before halftime via Michael Ballack. The US really should have had an equalizer and absolutely deserved a penalty they didn't receive. The Germans were lucky to win this one. Americans would leave the World Cup with their best modern result though, and their heads were definitely held high for good reason. The ante has been raised moving forward towards Germany 2006, where the US would begin their qualifying campaign with a playoff win against Grenada. Advancing to a group with Jamaica, El Salvador, and Panama, a surprisingly difficult group given what stage we're in. This wasn't incredibly smooth, but the US would advance to the hex of the game to spare nonetheless. Advancing alongside Panama, we would meet Mexico, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Trinidad and Tobago. From here, qualification continued to be drama-free, with the USA winning 6 of their first 7 games, only losing at the Azteca during this time, and eventually finishing top of the table alongside Mexico, easily qualifying for their 5th straight World Cup. It's insane how far we've come in such a short time, where the US qualifying for the World Cup has gone from a miracle to a formality in less than 2 decades. The US was riding a wave of momentum into Germany 2006, where they would get a pretty tough draw. We get Italy, a team that's already beaten us in multiple World Cups, along with a golden generation for the now independent Czech Republic and debutantes Ghana, who would prove to be more than worth their inclusion here. It's easy to say in hindsight that this group ends up being the group of death at this tournament. First up was the Czechs, and a lot was riding on this game. This is sort of a new era for the US, with Claudio Reyna as the captain now and guys like Landon Donovan and Brian McBride stepping into bigger roles. They would play against a great Czech team too, with all-time great midfielder Pavel Nedved, along with young future greats in Tomáš Rosický and Petr Cech. It was 2 other guys, a dude named Zdeněk Grigara finding their big striker Jan Koller in the box, and Koller finding the back of the net. That gave the Czechs a 1-0 lead within minutes, and never really got any better for the US. Rosický would score not 1, but 2 amazing goals, with the first one being one of the best scored at the entire tournament, and the US was just played off the field in this one. This was now our 5th loss in 5 different World Cups to 5 different Eastern European countries. Next up was Italy, and we absolutely needed a result here to keep our World Cup alive. Against a team even better than the Czechs, with legends like Andrea Pirlo, Francesco Totti, Gianluigi Buffon in goal, and the great center back duo of Fabio Cannavaro and Alessandro Nesta, the US more than held their own. The Americans had basically all the pressure at the beginning of the game, but that didn't stop Italy from getting a goal against the run of play thanks to the brilliance of Pirlo and a finish from Alberto Gilardino. Luckily, we would bring it back on another comical own goal, equalizing the game at 1-1. The chaos was by no means over though. Daniele De Rossi would get himself sent off after elbowing the fuck out of Brian McBride, and that gave us a man advantage for a little bit. But a red card for Pablo Mastroni right before halftime and a red card for Eddie Pope right on the other side of halftime actually put us at a man disadvantage for the rest of the game. Still, we somehow held out for the 1-1 draw and still looked like the better team for good portions of this game. We actually got the point off Italy, and that was huge because it put us into a possible win in your in situation. So here's the setup. If Italy is able to get a win over the Czechs, then that puts everything on our final game against Ghana. A Ghana win or a draw puts the African side through, but an American win puts us through to continue our heartwarming underdog run. We didn't get off to the best start though, when one play midway through the first half both got Ghana a goal via Humino Draman and also injured Claudio Reyna, so that's not great. Luckily, all it took to hit back was DeMarcus Beasley doing the same thing for the States and whipping it across to Clint Dempsey, who beat the Ghanaian defense to equalize for the States right before halftime. On the verge of getting back to the locker room, the referee gave Razak Pimpong a penalty that was just not one. No bias here, of course, but this is not a penalty, although Stephen Apio would step up and convert. Ghana would certainly take this lead no matter how it came, and they were able to keep it amidst constant pressure from the US throughout the second half. In a win-or-you're-out game, the US could not win, and thus, they were out. In last place in the group, too. The US just keeps yo-yoing back and forth between having good runs and crashing out. Although in this case, Italy would go on to win the World Cup, and in hindsight, this was always going to be a really tough group for the US to get out of, considering how talented the Czechs and Ghanaians were as well. But we'll have to settle for being the only team to get a result off of Italy during the entire tournament. This brings us to qualifying for South Africa 2010, where the US would begin their campaign by dismantling Barbados over the course of a two-leg playoff. Sorry, Riri. In the three-group stage, the US would be grouped with Trinidad and Tobago, Guatemala, and Cuba, and this went pretty well. We lost in Port of Spain to Trinidad on match day 5, but got 5 wins out of the other 5 games, and we made it to the Hex pretty effortlessly. Us in Trinidad and Tobago made it along with Mexico, Costa Rica, Honduras, and El Salvador, where it was really just a 4-horse race between the US, Canada, Costa Rica, and Honduras. A 3-game winning streak late in the campaign saw the US secure their spot late and eventually win the group, getting them to the World Cup once again. It's nice that this has become basically automatic by this point. South Africa 2010 was my first World Cup, and the group draw couldn't have been any nicer to my Americans. England out of pot 1, easily the weakest team of the non-host teams in that draw other than like Italy. Then they got Slovenia out of the European pot, probably the weakest team in that pot depending on what you think of Greece Harambal. And then you get Algeria out of the African and South American teams. What a godsend of a draw. If the US can't qualify out of this group, what are we doing? The first game was the big-ticket Hollywood game against England. It's a rematch of the great 1950 upset, and this game ended up being a little bit underwhelming. England took the lead immediately when Steven Gerrard pounced on a moment of weakness from the American defense to score in the 4th minute. England may have held on for the 1-0 win had this not happened in the 40th minute.
Tries to get away from Gerrard, fires it in hard alone, a desperate mistake by Robert Green.
That is Robert Green in goal for England, who shockingly doesn't get another game after this mistake, which has got to be one of the worst goalie mistakes in the history of this World Cup. This goal completely changed the game, with the Americans looking better in the second half and Josie Altidore nearly finding a winner for the States. Tim Howard held out in goal, and the US was able to scrap a point off of favored England with a 1-1 draw. And even if the methods they did so were a bit dodgy, I was super happy with the point against England. Like, I will take this. Moving from Rustenburg to Johannesburg, we have game 2 against Slovenia, and this is where this run started getting weird. Slovenia took an early lead from a long shot by Walter Birsa, beating Tim Howard from well outside the box. The States would then push for the equalizer, but instead went down 2-0 right before halftime when Iguchi and Yuwu played Zlatan Lublankic onside, and the Slovenian was able to finish. 13-year-old me was ready to never watch soccer again by this point, but the US would hit back in the second half. Landon Donovan got open down the right side and got towards the goal at a tight angle, and he wasn't able to find anyone to cross, so he just shot himself. Fucking smashed it near post. It looks like a hockey goal, but we were back to down 2-1 after he did this. The US would continue to dominate chances from here, with Josie Altidore finding Michael Bradley for the close-range finish and the equalizer in the 82nd minute. Now even at 2-2, the US completed the comeback when Lannon's free kick was put into the box and finished by Maurice Edu. Except, no. The Malian referee blew the whistle for a foul that I maintain to this day did not happen. I was of course livid as a teenager, crying foul and feeling robbed. Looking back, we've seen more egregious calls made just in South Africa alone, but it really hurt to be only on 2 points after these 2 performances. We now needed a win against Algeria in Game 3 to go through now. Shifting to Pretoria for the group finale against the Phoenix, this game ended up being a war of attrition. Algeria had 0 goals scored and only 1 conceded through their first 2 games. That 1 goal coming from a howler from their goalie that they also benched like England did with Robert Green. Algeria's new goalie Rice and Boli denied the Americans multiple times in this game. Josie blasted over the bar from close range, and the game went to halftime 0-0. The second half was similarly dramatic, with Clint Dempsey hitting the post in the 57th minute to unluckily keep the game scoreless. Neither team would be able to make the breakthrough going into stoppage time, where one of the most insane sequences in US soccer history happened. Algeria damn near scored, then the Americans broke, and on the counter, Landon Donovan scored the most famous goal in US World Cup history.
For the USA, can they do it here? Cross, and Dempsey's denied again, and Donovan has scored! Oh.
This moment right here locked me in as a US national team supporter. Oh my god, it's still crazy to this day. The US was about to bottle this tournament away, but they snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, and they not only made it back to the knockouts, but won their group for the first time since all the way back in 1930. They barely edged England on goals scored, and thus dodged all the big dogs. Instead, the US was headed straight for a round of 16 rematch against their conquerors in 2006. The Black Stars of Ghana. Rustenburg saw another dramatic game in round 2 of one of the modern World Cup's best, most random rivalries. Just a few minutes into the game, Ricardo Clark gave the ball away to Kevin Prince Boateng, who did it all by himself from here, advancing towards goal and beating Tim Howard to put Ghana in an early lead. Holding this lead past halftime, Jonathan Mensah would take down Big Clint in the box, and Landon would easily convert the penalty to equalize for the Americans. Both teams would remain tied 1-1 until extra time, where just a few minutes in, Asamoah Gyan would strike again. Gyan got on the end of a random punt and beat Carlos Bocanegra, avoided the close down from Jay Demera, and finished past Tim Howard for honestly a great goal for Ghana. The US were unable to find an equalizer here, and my heart was broken. The universe had a plan here. If the US wins, we never get the diabolical Luis Suarez handball, but damn was this such a good opportunity for us to make the semis. Still, it was a good run for the US off the back of the 2006 failure, and it certainly got me invested in maybe a better run in 4 years' time. The US would have no trouble getting to Brazil 2014, avoiding trouble after an early loss to Jamaica, and getting out of a group just alongside the Reggae Boys at the expense of Guatemala and Antigua and Barbuda to reach the Hex again. Despite losing their first Hex game to Honduras, the US would pick up 22 of their remaining 27 points to win the group, with the run being kickstarted by the now infamous Snow Classico in Colorado, a 1-0 win over Costa Rica in very wintry conditions. If 2010 provided an amazing group draw, then 2014 saw the complete opposite. We got Ronaldo in Portugal, we got fucking Ghana again, and there's Germany coming in like the Grim Reaper. I was not optimistic at all going into this World Cup, and it really didn't help that Landon Donovan was left off the squad despite only being 32. Our first match in Brazil will be a chance at double revenge against Ghana and Natal, and what an opener for the US. This is crazy. And I didn't get to watch because I was a 14-year-old kid in international waters. After getting home from our poorly timed cruise and seeing how the US pulled this one off though, what a crazy game. This match began literally right at kickoff when Clint Dempsey got the ball, crossed up John Boy in the box, and finished past Adam Quaresay to score 30 seconds into the match. This is one of the fastest goals in World Cup history, and it really set the tone for this one. It forced Ghana to chase the match, and chase the match they did for the whole rest of the game. Tim Howard was on his game in goal, but Ghana would finally find their equalizer late in the match when Asamoah Gyan played the perfect backheel pass to Andre Ayew, who was able to finish and ruin all the hard work by the US. Having thrown everything away, the US would get a corner in the 86th minute. Mexican hero Graham Zusi would put the ball into the box, and a young John Anthony Brooks became a Yankee hero forever when he put head to ball and got it into the back of the net for an American winner. After seeing Ghana end our World Cup twice in a row, I cannot tell you how satisfying this result was. It got us a huge 3 points going into the jaws of this group, and if we could get a result against either Germany or Portugal, we could actually reach the knockouts. I didn't think that was even possible before the kickoff of this game. I can't emphasize enough just how unlucky I still thought it was at this point though. Next was our game against Portugal, and even though this team had a reputation at the time of being soft and basically chokers, and just being Cristiano Ronaldo and 22 other guys, and they were coming off a 4-0 beating at the hands of the Germans. Okay, yeah, there was a lot of reasons to be skeptical about Portugal, but still, I don't really think people thought the US was getting a result in this one. I didn't really. The game took place on the day I got back from my cruise, and I remember rushing home to get the game on. I had my buddy Luca meet me at my place as soon as I got back, and we put the game on immediately to see big dumb Jeff Cameron try and clear the ball, and instead give the ball right to Nani for a clean shot on goal. Nani scored. It was already 1-0 Portugal just 5 minutes into the game, and I must have been this close to doing the Grandpa Simpson meme where he comes in, puts his hat on the rack, then turns around, grabs his hat, and walks right back out the front door. This was the complete opposite start to the Ghana game. The US would luckily play themselves into this game, being played in Manaus in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. The game remained 1-0 at halftime after Tim Howard made a great save to deny 2016 Euro hero Adair. Then we got to the second half, and this is where the US made their move. Off a failed counter, the ball got back to Jermaine Jones outside of the box, and Jones dropped the hammer on the Portuguese defense. He hit it past all of them, and you could tell that their goalkeeper Beto was surprised by this because he was rooted to the ground when Jones' shot sailed right past him. The game was even at 1-1. This is one of my favorite US soccer goals of all time. And similar to Brooks, this goal alone has made Jermaine Jones a USMNT hero in my eyes. The Americans would continue to take the game to the Lusitanians, and they got their reward in the 81st minute when Clint Dempsey scored from short range, having just barely been played onside by Bruno Alves. And we were jubilant at this point. Taking all 3 points from Portugal and wrapping up our place in the knockouts, this is insanity. Unfortunately for me and Luca and the rest of the US fans watching this game, after not doing dick all for the first 90 minutes of this match, CR7 woke up. He got the ball on the right flank and whipped in a mean cross for substitute Sylvester Varela, who was given the free header by big dumb Jeff Cameron being too slow. Varela had to pass Timmy, and literally at the death of the game, Portugal had brought it back. It felt at the time like we had been kicked in the nuts. This was probably not enough for the Portuguese to make it through still, but it definitely fucked us over. We were now on 4 points on 2 games, and as much as that's 3 or 4 points better than I thought we'd be at this point, we now either needed a result against Germany or from some help from outside of our control in order to make it to the knockouts. Game 3 in Recife, another game against Germany for the USMNT. Jurgen Klinsmann was our manager for this run, a dude that actually scored against us last time we played against Germany. We also had a few dual nationals on the US team that could have played for Germany, including Jermaine Jones, Fabian Johnson, and Julian Green. Needless to say, this was a fascinating matchup that ended up being by far the most boring game in this group of death. The first half was surprisingly even, with neither team breaking through, but the US not looking overwhelmed against the team that will eventually lift the trophy for 2014. In the second half, though, Germany showed their class, with both Mesut Ozil and Miroslav Klose nearly putting them in the lead not long after the restart. So yeah, it was kind of coming when Ozil whipped in a cross for Per Mertesacker, the big fucking German, whose header was saved by Tim Howard but parried straight to Thomas Muller, who finished to put Germany in the lead 1-0 in the 55th minute. The US really only had one good opportunity to equalize from here, and it came in stoppage time on a great team counter that was amazing up until the end when Alejandro Bedoya's shot was blocked by Philip Lahm and sent out. The Germans would hold on for the 1-0 win, and the Americans' fate laid in the hands of the other game in Brasilia. Over in that game, Portugal took a 1-0 lead in the first half on a Ghanaian own goal, but Asamoah Gyan would score in the second half to bring Ghana back. At this point, with the US already losing in Recife, all US fans were now rooting for Portugal to either win this game or draw it. We didn't hate Ghana, maybe some of us did after 2006 and 2010, but Portugal had a way worse goal difference thanks to the beating Germany laid on them. If Ghana won this game and was even with us on 4 points at the end of the groups, they were way more likely to be competitive with us on goal difference and possibly sneak through ahead of us. Luckily for us, Ronaldo would score his only goal in Brazil in the 80th minute to give the Portuguese the lead and the win. And the dude may as well have celebrated by carrying around the American flag. We were now going through to the knockouts as a result after beating Portugal in goal difference, and we now earned ourselves a shot at the Belgian Golden Generation in the round of 16. Coastal Salvador was the site for this matchup between the Golden Generation of Belgian footballers and the Copper Generation of American soccer players, a game that would break records. Tim Howard had to make a save on Divock Origi in the first minute, and that set the tone for a very busy afternoon for old Timmy. The first half wasn't super interesting from here, and we got to the second half still 0-0. Timmy made some great saves from here, denying a header from Dries Mertens by doing the Princess Peach float in the air trick, and he blocked Origi on another 1-on-1. He then did it again to Kevin Morales. He then denied Eden Hazard. He got another save on Origi at this point. This man Divock Origi was 19 years old at this point. He's now in his mid-30s as the time of this video going up, and he probably still sees Big Timmy in his nightmares. We get to stoppage time, and this is the part of the game that American fans remember to this day. Jeff Cameron does something good for once and puts a ball into the box. Jermaine Jones wins the header, and it was perfect because he put the ball behind the Belgian defense and right in front of an onside Chris Wondolowski. This man only had Thibaut Courtois to beat from extremely close range. And yes, Courtois is the greatest goalie of my generation, but this was easier to make than miss. Wando blasts it over the bar. People shit on Josie Altidore around this time, but Josie doesn't miss this if he's fit. This was horrible. So yeah, huge missed opportunity, and now we go to extra time tied 0-0. Belgium would take Origi off for Romelu Lukaku, and that ended up changing everything. Morales played Lukaku down the right side, and he destroyed Matt Besler. Put the ball to Kevin De Bruyne, and while Omar Gonzalez did get first touch of this ball, he wasn't able to keep possession of it. KDB got the ball, and he beat Besler and Timmy for a 93rd minute goal. Big Timmy would keep the States in it with 2 big saves on shots from Lukaku, and another one on a shot from Morales, and this put him at an absolutely ridiculous 15 saves for this game. The man was looking like Henrik Lundqvist in front of goal, but he was not able to stop a finish from Lukaku in the 105th minute to make it 2-0 Belgium. We now enter the second half of stoppage time, and the States faced long odds of even making it to pens at this point. Those odds were helped a lot though when Michael Bradley put in a ball for our own 19-year-old Julian Green, who had the perfect positioning in front of Toby Alderweireld and finished past Courtois with a great volley to get us back in the game. Jermaine Jones actually had a good chance to equalize, but put it wide. A missed opportunity for sure, even if it wasn't anywhere near as damning as what Wando did. Clint Dempsey had an even better chance off a set piece, getting through on goal, but Courtois did Courtois things, and finally, that was it. The U.S. turned this game into cinema, and Tim Howard cemented his legacy as one of the great national team risers in World Cup history, but our crazy run was over. Frankly, even making it out of the groups made this World Cup a win as far as I was concerned, but damn near taking down Belgium in the round of 16 is something to be proud of. That brings us to the qualification cycle for Russia 2018, and you probably already know how this goes. The US would start this out in a group with Guatemala, Trinidad and Tobago, and St. Vincent, and after 3 games they were not even in a spot to qualify for the Hex. They beat the shit out of St. Vincent 6-1 in the first game, but drew 0-0 in Port of Spain, and then after that lost 2-0 in Guatemala to sit behind both Las Chapines and the Soca Warriors. The US would respond by winning 4-0 in Columbus against the Guatemalans, 6-0 in the Grenadines, and then 4-0 in Jacksonville against Trinidad and Tobago. Having tasted our own blood, the boys responded and took first place in the group, so that's a good sign, right? We get to the Hex now, where us and the Trinis join Mexico, Costa Rica, Honduras, and Panama. And here we fucking go. Losing in Columbus to Mexico 2-1 and then getting blasted 4-0 in San Jose was not ideal at all, but the US actually did rebound from here. They beat the absolute shit out of Honduras 6-0 and also took care of Trinidad and Tobago 2-0 with a respectable 1-1 draw in Panama City sandwiched in between. Sitting on 7 points halfway through the campaign in 3rd place and in an automatic spot, and also only 1 point behind Costa Rica for 2nd place, this definitely could have been worse. US would not pull away from here though. With draws at the Azteca and in San Pedro Sula, neither were terrible results, but losing in New Jersey to Costa Rica 2-0 was not good, and thus the US entered Matchday 9 in 4th place, currently in the Intercontinental spot. A win in Game 9 against Panama at home was huge though, because it put them in 3rd place, clear of both Honduras and Panama by 2 points. The US also had a huge goal difference advantage on both, meaning just a single point in Cuba against Trinidad and Tobago would put us into the World Cup. We all know what happens next. We made our breakthrough to the 1990 World Cup at the hands of Trinidad and Tobago, and we haven't missed the World Cup since. Thanks to a shambolic Omar Gonzalez own goal and a second goal from Alvin Jones just before halftime, the US would lose 2-1 and blow that opportunity. Things were fine if we got the right results in the other 2 games. Luckily for us, Costa Rica would lose in Panama City, putting them ahead of us, and Honduras posted a 3-2 home victory over Mexico. Did I say luckily? I actually meant catastrophically. Mexico totally didn't pay us back for what we did for them in 2014, so South Korea fans, be prepared for them to fuck y'all over like they did to us. Because of this result, the US would finish not 3rd in the last automatic qualifying spot, and not 4th, the Intercontinental playoff spot. Nope, the US was in 5th place. They were out for the first time since 1986. This was a rough qualifying cycle for me. The US is the main team I support, but if they're out, then no worries. I can root for my secondary team, who for me was the Netherlands, and oh, they're out too. Okay, this sucks. I had to watch the 2018 World Cup as a true neutral, and it honestly changed the way I watched the World Cup. The implications moving forward for me is that I'm definitely less of a fan of the US team than I used to be, even though I will root for them at least a little bit moving forward. I'm not going to speak too much on the current state of the country, that's not what this series is about, but I will say I'm less proud to be from this country than I was around the time of the 2010 and 2014 World Cups. I'm kind of just here for the vibes now. We move forward from the US's darkest day in soccer and try to qualify for Qatar 2022 now. The US would automatically make it to the octagonal alongside Mexico, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Honduras, Panama, Canada, and El Salvador, with the top 3 advancing and 4th place going to the Intercontinental Playoffs. The US had a good start this time. They lost in Panama City, but were unbeaten in their other 6 games to start on their way through the double round robin. They sat tied with Mexico at the top halfway through at this point. A draw in Kingston and a loss at Tim Hortons Field in Canada put the US on shaky ground 10 games in, only being 1 point above Panama for the playoff spot. A huge win against Honduras and Minnesota definitely helped though, as did a 0-0 draw at the Azteca. With a huge 5-1 win in Orlando against their rivals Panama, they were basically through. Costa Rica would beat us on the final match day and pull even on points, but the US would finish 3rd place in the group on goal difference, and we're back to the World Cup. Praise Jesus. I really didn't know what to expect going into this World Cup. I was low-key just happy the US was here, but the group chart really opened things up. England out of pot 1 wasn't a horrible draw. This was someone we'd be comfortable against at least. But Wales out of Europe and Iran out of Asia were 2 teams we were 100% even with at the very worst. This was such a fun group for geopolitical implications, although the US-Iran thing is definitely less fun now, and it gave us a real chance at the knockouts. Apparently people were calling this a group of death, which I think is insane. Group E had Germany, Spain, and Japan. Group F had Croatia, Morocco, and Belgium. Shit, I think even Group H is stronger with Portugal, Uruguay, South Korea, and Ghana. Game 1 in Al Rayyan was against Wales, the first World Cup game for the Welsh since 1958, and they looked generationally rusty. Gareth Bale finally making the World Cup was an awesome story, but he was washed by this point. Definitely not capable of single-handedly winning games for his team anymore. The US dominated opportunities in the first half and found their breakthrough in the 36th minute when Christian Pulisic played the perfect through ball for Tim Weah, who finished past Wayne Hennessy to put us in the lead. Pulisic had become the star on this team, who had more players in the high-tier European leagues than any US team that had made the World Cup before, and Pulisic had just had his first great World Cup moment. Now that we were in the lead, Wales would grow into the game and start dominating possession in the second half, and I do remember getting more nervous around this time. One Welsh attack in the 80th minute saw Walker Zimmerman egregiously tackle Bale from behind to give away a penalty. Well, Gareth stepped up, easily beat Matt Turner, and equalized for his team. The game got open and scrappy from here, and neither team were able to find a winner, putting us in some purgatory. Our chances at qualifying weren't terminally damaged or anything, but we needed better results than this in the other 2 group games here. Going into this game, it would be easy to assume England wiped the floor with us the same way they did with Iran, but history indicated this game would be more competitive than you'd think. There was so much hype around this game going in, and it did not live up to that hype. England looked horrible on attack. They were only a step or 2 above how they looked against Algeria in 2010, and while the US surprisingly had more chances in this game, they also couldn't put any of them away, and the game finished 0-0. This result definitely brought England's spirits down, and it low-key didn't do much for us either because Wales lost to Iran in the other game. Now Game 3 against Iran was going to mean everything because England was almost certainly getting one of the 2 knockout spots. Iran was ahead of us in the table and had the advantage going into the game, knowing a draw would still be enough for them to go through at our expense. US versus Iran round 2 had similar stakes and tensions were similarly high, but on the pitch the US looked like the better team. The game was just as cagey as you'd expect, but in the 38th minute we broke through. Weston McKennie put a ball forward for Serginho Dest, and he would gather the ball and find Christian Pulisic in the box. Iranian keeper Alireza Biranvand came out to contest and the 2 would collide, but Pulisic would put the ball into the back of the net and VAR would uphold the goal. Pulisic paid the price. This must have hurt like hell, and he would have to be subbed off at halftime, but he did what he needed to do and showed the level of grit that I prefer from players that represent the US. This is our identity. We have grit. Iran had chances to equalize in the second half, but ultimately they didn't have to choose. Not having Alireza Jahanbakhsh definitely took away some of their bite, and the US would hold on to their 1-0 win to defeat Iran and avenge the 1998 team. This put the US through to the knockouts, where they would match up with a good Netherlands team that was definitely the favorites against us, but were seen as gettable compared to some of the other group winners. Of course, this draw sucked for me, who was losing to one of my 2 teams no matter what here. In Al Rayyan, any optimism us American fans had were gone immediately when Memphis Depay scored in the 10th minute to give the Dutch the lead. We kept them out of goal until literally right before halftime when old-ass Daley Blind scored to make it 2-0. Both goals were assisted by Denzel Dumfries. I had still been a bit optimistic up until the second goal, but this was like a gut punch going into the break. The US would get one back in the second half when Pulisic got the ball to Haji Wright and right-flicked the ball backwards past Andreas Noppert. This was a nice goal, but Dumfries answered it with a goal of his own. This dude just murdered us that night. Dutch would win 3-1 and advance to the quarters to get their hearts broken, and for us, I was honestly satisfied with this. We made it back to the knockouts with a young team ahead of co-hosting in 2026, and I was happy. This brings us to North America 2026, where the US will be co-hosting along with Canada and Mexico, and this is terrible timing. Not that we've particularly had our shit together as a country recently in general, but it is bad here right now. The good news is, it does qualify the US directly to the World Cup without me having to talk about another shit show of a qualification campaign. We would be placed in pot 1 and get a pretty interesting draw. We got Australia out of pot 2, one of the best draws we could have gotten out of there for sure, even if that will be an even matchup that we've never seen before at the World Cup. We then got Paraguay out of group 3, a strong, solid, but unspectacular South American team. Then we got an unknown European team, and when that team eventually ended up being Turkey, our group suddenly got a whole lot harder. We got a team tougher than us in Australia, a team more talented than us in Turkey, and a team that cares more than us in Paraguay. I think there's a chance we win this group, you never know, but I think there's just as strong a possibility we finish last in the group and crash out. You just never know with the US men's national team anymore, and I don't think it's controversial to say we got the toughest group draw out of the 3 co-hosts. Thank you so much for watching video 13 out of 48. One of the most cursed ones will do pretty appropriately. This is my team too, but the vibes are just so weird. And, well, I don't know. I have my moments where I still feel good about the national team, but there are teams coming up that I'm actually even more excited about. So stay tuned for those. They'll probably be less long as well. We'll have a stretch of 5 in a row coming soon that I'm actually really excited about. You'll see what 5 those are, but tomorrow we're going to cover Australia, a fascinating parallel for the USA, and a team with a few distinct eras to talk about. Please subscribe if this is your thing. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, and I have ideas for more fun videos to make in the future after the World Cup starts.